The B-17's tail tore off midair, and he was still inside. No chute, no exit. Just a screaming fall through frozen sky. Everyone thought he was dead, but when they found the wreckage, he was still breathing. What happened in between will shock even the toughest. But let's start from the beginning. He was 22, and his name was Cole Riker. Not Cole the warrior, not Cole the legend, just Cole. A quiet farm boy from Salina, Kansas, who knew the weight of a hay bale long before he learned the weight of a .50 caliber Browning. He grew up with cracked hands, calloused palms, and a father who spoke more with nods than words. Cole was the kind of young man who didn't look like a hero, and never wanted to be one, until war called him up. Now he sat, alone, encased in metal and glass, in the tail of a B-17 bomber nicknamed the Lil Liberty Bell. His job? Protect the rear, stop anything that came from behind, see death first, and give it hell before it reached the others. January 14th, 1944. Bremen. Mission briefing was straightforward. Hit the industrial yards on the north side, get in and out before the Flak made mincemeat of the formation. But by 44, everyone knew that was a lie. The Luftwaffe had grown bolder, their flak gunners meaner. Missions like this were just survival puzzles now, and every crew knew someone who hadn't made it back. Cole was strapped in, fingers tight on his twin Brownings. Behind him, nothing but open sky. Beneath him, enemy territory. The Lil Liberty Bell flew tight behind Red-Eye Betty, her wingtips level, her belly holding 2 tons of high-explosive truth. To Cole's left and right, other fortresses filled the sky like silver prayers. The sun cut through the cloud cover, illuminating the squadron in pale gold. And for a second, just a second, it felt peaceful. That peace didn't last. It never did. From the mist ahead came the first sign, a deep, stuttering echo like a distant drumbeat. The flak. Not the quick chatter of machine guns. No. This was thunder. And then the blossoms appeared, black flowers blooming in the air, exploding outward with iron petals that could tear through wings, engines, and men without a second thought. Cole braced. Whomp! The plane jerked violently. A sound like metal screaming tore through the hull. Then another. Jesus! Someone shouted through the intercom. Port wings hit! We're leaking! Static. Cole's stomach twisted. He swung his guns out, scanning for fighters. Nothing. No silhouettes against the horizon. But he didn't have to see them. Not yet. The flak was enough. Then, the moment, the strike. One explosion, closer than the rest, rocked the tail. It felt like the whole world had shuddered. Cole's harness jolted him forward. Something wet splashed across his face and chest. He looked down. Blood. His own. A jagged hole the size of a boot heel smoked behind his left shoulder. Flak had punched through the tail's lower shell and torn into the hydraulic lines. One of the cables was twitching like a severed tendon. His vision blurred. The cold became unbearable. But worse than the pain, worse than the blood, was the silence. He reached for the intercom. Tails hit! Repeat! Tails hit! Only static answered. He turned. Larry, the waist gunner. His body slumped against the window, helmet cracked, blood trailing down the gun mount. Cole blinked. Tried again. Larry? Larry? Are you? Nothing. Then the radio. One last crackle, barely intelligible. Mayday. Bell. Hit. Losing. Altitude. The pitch of the engines shifted. The fortress was falling. Cole reached for the emergency latch, the one that could blow the tail hatch, but the blast had bent the frame. The mechanism was jammed. He twisted, pulled, kicked. The door wouldn't move. He turned to unclip his parachute, but it was latched behind him, between the armor and the frame. One hand worked at it blindly, fingers shaking. He couldn't reach it, couldn't get out. He was stuck, bleeding, alone, and the B-17 was groaning like an old beast dying mid-flight. Through the small dome of his glass turret, Cole watched the contrails of other bombers disappear into distance. Clean, proud, intact. But his plane, his crew, was falling apart. He pressed his back against the seat, took one shallow breath, and whispered the only prayer he knew. Not like this. The Lil Liberty Bell was dying. Her engines sputtered unevenly, coughing thick smoke into the freezing January air. Her wings, once part of a proud 12-ship V formation, now trembled and buckled under asymmetric lift. One engine was aflame, not enough to consume her entirely, but more than enough to doom her. Cole Riker didn't need instruments to know they were losing altitude fast. The rattling, the vibrations, the shift in the horizon outside his tail turret, it all screamed the same truth. They were going down. No other planes turned back. No Mustangs descended in escort. There were no German fighters now. There didn't need to be. The Flak had done its work. Surgical, brutal. Cole's bomber was the wounded animal at the back of the herd, limping and alone. Inside the tail compartment, Cole's world had narrowed to pain and sound. A high-pitched whine screamed in his ears, drowning out thought. Blood had soaked through the flight suit on his left side, pooling under his seat. His boots were numb. His legs wouldn't move. He wasn't sure if it was the cold or something worse. He tried calling out again, to Larry, to the cockpit, to anyone. But the intercom was still dead, and all he heard in return was the groan of stressed metal and the soft rattle of loose rivets. The skin of the plane flexed around him with each jolt, as though the fortress itself was fighting to stay alive. And then it happened. The sound came first, sharp, unnatural, like a massive wrench being twisted through bolts the size of dinner plates. Then the sensation, a violent jerk forward, followed by a disorienting tilt. Cole's stomach flipped. The view outside the tail window spun. Sky, earth, sky again. The tail section was no longer part of the plane. It had broken off. Mid-air. He was falling. Backward. Trapped in a metal coffin. Thousands of feet above the frozen German countryside. Time disintegrated. There was no sense of motion, only chaos. Wind screamed through the holes in the fuselage, slapping his face, tearing at his jacket. Frost formed instantly on the glass of the turret. His breath crystallized before it even left his lungs. It felt like knives on his skin. Cole didn't scream. Couldn't. His lungs were locked. His brain had slipped into something deeper than fear. A kind of stunned silence only those close to death ever truly know. And in that space, memories came. Not like visions, but like voices echoing inside his skull. Clara, smiling, wiping her hands on her apron at the little diner in Salina. Her voice saying, "Write me, don't forget." His mother's hands, bent, red from years of washing clothes without a machine, holding a cracked photograph of his father in uniform. His brother Tom, uniform stiff with salt, laughing the night before he shipped out to the Pacific. Guadalcanal. Never came home. Now it was Cole's turn. Let it be quick, he thought. That was the only prayer left. No bargaining, no promises, just one final request. And then, impact. Not the sudden crush he expected, not a clean stop. It was slower, more drawn out, like the tail was being eaten alive. The pine trees, somehow, by luck, by angle, by God, the falling tail section struck the canopy of a dense forest, clipping the tops of the trees. Each branch acted like a slap, slowing the descent in brutal increments. The structure splintered on the way down, shredding apart, reducing speed but tearing metal and bone alike. The final crash came with a bone-snapping force. The turret's glass exploded, panels collapsed inward. Cole was thrown forward against the mount, then slammed back, and darkness took him. For how long he didn't know. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time had stopped mattering. But eventually, against all odds, his eyes opened. The world was blurry. A taste of blood in his mouth. His ears rang like a bell had been struck inside his skull. He couldn't feel his legs, couldn't move much at all. But he was breathing, alive. Somewhere far above him, smoke still curled in the sky like a ribbon tied to the dead. And Cole Riker, farm kid, tail gunner, the man who didn't jump, had survived the impossible. They found him 12 hours later. It was deep in the woods outside Bremen, where the frost hadn't melted in weeks, and silence hung over the pines like a second snowfall. The tail section of the Lil Liberty Bell lay crumpled like a broken tin can at the base of a hill, smoke still curling from its riveted seams. Bits of canvas, insulation, and aluminum were scattered across the forest floor, snow dusted over blood, over oil, over shattered glass. The pine trees had torn the plane apart and somehow cushioned the man inside it. He wasn't conscious when they reached him. Two figures emerged at first light. French-speaking, bundled in rough wool and worn boots. Civilians. Resistance, perhaps. One of them was a farmer. The other had the wary eyes of someone who'd lived too long under occupation. They moved quietly, instinctively, scanning the air for engine noise as they crept through the wreckage. Then they saw him, folded inside the shredded skeleton of the tail gunner's turret, arms twisted at unnatural angles. Blood frozen in patches across his flight suit. He didn't look alive. But when the older man leaned in, he heard it. A breath. Shallow, wheezing. The boy was breathing. They spent nearly 20 minutes prying what was left of the hatch apart. Every movement risked snapping what few bones were still intact. When they pulled him free, he didn't cry out. His eyes were half open, clouded. His lips were blue. There was no resistance, no sound. They wrapped him in thick blankets and dragged him on a makeshift sled through the woods, leaving the crushed metal behind. He didn't open his eyes again for 2 days. In that time, they hid him in the loft of a cattle barn. No names exchanged, no questions asked. The woman who lived there brought him broth, whispered prayers over him, and cried when she thought no one was looking. His fever burned through the night. He thrashed and moaned, muttering names. Larry, Billy, Jesus, pull up, pull up. Then came the boots. German soldiers, 4 of them, young and tired. One carried a bolt-action rifle with a cracked strap. Another had a cigarette half-smoked behind his ear. The farmer didn't resist. He simply pointed to the barn. They found Cole buried under hay and blankets, still too weak to speak. One of the soldiers raised his weapon, but another stepped forward, older, in a Luftwaffe medical uniform. He looked over the broken body, the bruises, the wounds, the blood that hadn't stopped seeping from the side. Then he turned to the others and said quietly, Zu jung, zu kaputt zum fliehen. Too young, too broken to escape. And just like that, they didn't shoot him. They transported him in the back of a supply truck, wrapped in tarp, wedged between crates of rations, to a POW infirmary just outside Hamburg. There, in a low, drafty hospital with peeling walls and sour bread for breakfast, Cole Riker hovered on the edge of death for 3 more weeks. They said he had 2 crushed ribs, a shattered femur in 3 places, and internal bleeding that would have killed a stronger man. The shrapnel near his spine had missed his spinal cord by less than an inch. He would never walk the same. His hearing in one ear was gone. A steel plate was implanted into his skull where the impact had fractured bone. Some nights he woke up screaming without knowing why. Sometimes he didn't wake up at all until morning. He didn't ask about the rest of the crew. He didn't have to. It was a nurse named Greta, early 30s, eyes like storm clouds, who told him. They did not survive, any of them. Larry, Billy, Captain Norton, even Jesse, the youngest in the crew. Gone. No parachutes, no survivors, no remains, except what the Germans recovered in pieces. For days, Cole lay in silence, not crying, not moving, just listening, to the wind through the broken window, to the boots echoing in the hallway, to the ticking of the clock mounted crookedly above the medicine cabinet. He stopped asking for food, stopped speaking. Then Greta did something unexpected. One night, she came in early for her shift. She said nothing, just placed a small leather-bound notebook on the windowsill beside his bed. With it, a pencil stub. "For memory," she said in thick English. "You write, you remember, you do not vanish." At first, he ignored it. Then, slowly, shakily, he reached out one morning and opened to the first page. He didn't know what to write, so he began with a name. Larry. Then Billy. Then the rest. One page at a time, the story began to form. Not a tale of heroism, but of cold, of metal, of sky, of the wind before impact. The notebook became his anchor, a lifeline back to what had been lost, a tether to meaning in a place that had none. He was still in a prison hospital, still broken. But now, he was alive, and the story hadn't ended. Not yet. After the war, Cole didn't go home right away. He spent 2 years in VA hospitals across Europe and then the States, learning to walk again. His right hand trembled permanently. His left eye blurred after every flash of light. But he lived. He married Clara. She waited. He raised 2 sons who never went to war. He sold tractors, quietly. Never spoke of the sky, except once. In 1982, a historian tracked him down. Cole was the last survivor of the Lil Liberty Bell. The man asked him why he never jumped. Cole looked at him for a long time and said, "Because I wasn't supposed to die that day. Not for me. For them." He wrote it all down later, in a book never published, but passed to his grandchildren. Cole Riker died in 1999. On his gravestone, a simple line: he never jumped. And in that silence, not heroic, not dramatic, just honest, lives the whole truth of the war. Some men were meant to be remembered, and some never wanted to be.